Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll give a few seconds for folks to join, but thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join this webinar, Implementing the Revised TANF Data Report Instructions, Forms ACF 199, and of course, ACF 209. You have two methods of communicating with our esteemed group of panelists today. There is a Q&A box that you can access using the Q&A icon at the bottom or top of your screen, and you can submit questions to the panelists to be answered during a Q&A session that will occur later. And of course, there's also the chat box where you can request assistance if you need it or provide commentary there as well. I am now going to turn it over to the host for today, Lauren Froelich. Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for joining. As Steve said, today is implementing the revised TANF data report instructions. And this session is a follow-up to the November 15th webinar that introduced the latest revisions to instructions for the TANF data report. So this webinar is building on that one, and we're going to be walking through a crosswalk that we discussed last time that we've developed to really go line by line and show you all the changes that were made and the implications of those changes. And we're also going to discuss implications for any states and territories that use a legacy data preparation tool. And we'll go into that more later. We'll have time for questions and discussion, and please do enter any questions in the chat or Q&A, and we will make sure to get to those as well. And so with that, so this is our agenda. Like I said, this is kind of building off of the earlier webinar. So if you weren't able to attend that one, the recording is on the PRTA website. So we encourage you to go back and look at that one because we went more in depth on some of the changes, but we will briefly again go over the goals for this revision, how this interacts with the TANF data portal, and we'll look at the instructions and forms, talk briefly about the legacy data preparation tool and how that interacts with these new instructions. And then we'll go into that crosswalk of changes and the different categories of those changes. We'll have time for Q&A, and then we'd like to especially save some time at the end for those states and territories that do use the legacy data preparation tool, also known as FTANF. With that, and I'll say the slides will be available after the webinar, and a recording will be on the PRTA website later down the line. So the goals for the revision of the instructions were really to eliminate unnecessary data elements, clarify confusing instructions, all the while minimizing the burden and cost to states. We want to be transparent and proactive with guidance, hence this webinar and the crosswalk. We also are trying to leverage the new opportunities afforded with the new TANF data portal, which hopefully you all are logged, have accounts in, and have used. And then there were some changes made that reflect emerging best practices around inclusivity. And I did just want to add a note and emphasize that changes to the reporting instructions do not reflect any changes to TANF policy or regulations or anything like that. They really were just to reflect current policy, current regulation, and the current way things like the work participation rate are calculated. So nothing's changed, just the data that we need to do the monitoring and oversight is streamlined in some cases. So wanted to visit the TANF data portal and also give you a glimpse, if you haven't been lately, to see what it looks like now when you submit your data files. This is just a sample, but one of the things I was talking about with leveraging opportunities in the new TANF data portal is that we are continuing to improve feedback, error reports in the application. So as opposed to getting them through email, these are going to be in app. You'll eventually get an email alerting you that they're in there, but they're really designed to be more plain language, understandable, accessible, in a Microsoft Excel file that you get through this portal. So those kind of nonsensical edit codes in some cases are being replaced by descriptions that mean something, are tied back to item numbers. This is an opportunity for faster and more helpful feedback. And it's also, we're ongoing making improvements to it. So please do send feedback that you have. And we're currently in the middle of a transition period away from the TANF data reporting system to the TANF data portal. So during this period, you'll continue to receive those transmission reports over email until the official switch over. And one change is that all data that can be processed will be accepted by TDP during this transition. So there aren't any rejected files in TDP. And importantly, the validation and the error feedback that you'll get within TDP reflects these updated coding instructions, but allows legacy values. So that's kind of key to thinking about this transition and implementation period with the new instructions. If you continue to report some of the legacy values, what we're calling the legacy values, you may get an error saying, you know, this is no longer needed or this is out of range, but it's not gonna reject that case. It's not gonna reject that file. There is gonna be this transition period where the errors, the feedback are pushing you towards the new reporting instructions, but again, it is still allowing those values with some exceptions. So that's the TANF data portal, and happy to answer more questions about that. But I did want to get into the instructions and the forms themselves. So these are what they look like. They are on our website. On the right are the instructions. On the left is the revised form reporting layout. So both of these are two key resources to reference. And the reason I did want to explain about some of the delay in getting this second session to you and some of the communication we've put out about revisions to the revised instructions and what's behind that. So that takes me to the FTANF, or the Legacy Data Preparation Tool. And I did want to briefly put up a poll, if I may. I believe Emily maybe has the ability to do that. Yes, thank you. Okay, so we would love to know whether your state, to your knowledge, currently uses the tool known as FTANF. You may know it as FTANF or FTANF underscore 2009.exe. It looks something like this from what you can see on the slide. So your options are whether you use it to prepare data files, validate data files, prepare and validate, whether you no longer use it or you have no idea what I'm talking about. So that'll just kind of help us know our audience a little bit better. So we'll give just a minute for that. And I realize there might be some nuances in how you use it, so one of these categories might not fit. But I think we can close the poll. We can see where folks fell. Okay, interesting. So we've got about 11% use the FTANF to prepare or validate their files. Another 11% use it to do both. And 16% no longer use it, and 60% have no idea what I'm talking about. So that's great to know. So for those of you who might not know what I'm talking about, you don't really need to, but just for your awareness, FTANF was a tool that was developed decades ago. It's a legacy desktop application tool that helps some TANF partners prepare transmission files for their quarterly data report. It looks something like this. It has not been supported for many years by ACF, which means that we don't have the ability to fix it, to make changes, to even make sure that it's compliant with the latest operating system. So for those of you who do use it, you may have been frustrated with some of those limitations in the past, but we know it does provide a useful function for about 12, we believe about 12 states and territories. So in the course of updating the instructions, we realized that some of the changes we had made in the instructions, for example, saying this code is no longer in use, you don't need to report it to us. We realized that if you don't report it to us and you still use FTANF, that's going to cause an error. So we wanted to take the time to comb back through our instructions and make notations where that's the case. And so if you are still using FTANF, please do stay on to the end of this webinar, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about how you can know how that impacts you with these new instructions. So although FTANF is no longer something we support, we wanted to not cause additional problems for those who do still use it. So that's the short story behind these minor additions that we made, and we can go into that in more detail later. Okay, and so then for the changes in general, we have a few different categories. So there's a smaller subset of the changes that are substantive in that they significantly change the meaning of an item or coding options for an item. For example, two codes are combined into one, or we eliminate a code that's no longer an option. We have another set of changes that are non-substantive or clarifying. In these cases, you most likely do not need to make any coding changes whatsoever. It's just really an intent to reword, simplify, clarify language to help make the instructions more useful. So these are most likely not going to have technical implications. And then the third category are codes no longer in use. So these are codes that the federal government does not need you to report to us because of the nature of the TANF data file. We didn't just eliminate them. We're asking you to hold that spot so that the data can still be parsed and interpreted as it needs to be, but we don't need you to report that information to us. So we'll ignore it. If you want to keep reporting it, you can, but it is no longer in use for us. So those are the three categories. And based on feedback and conversations we had during the last webinar, and since then, our team developed this crosswalk of changes. So this is a file that you can find on our website. And if somebody from the data team could please link to it in the chat, that would be great. And this is what it looks like. So there is a README, which is the first tab. It explains what the document is, talks about those three categories of changes that I just went through. And then there are a few notes again on the legacy preparation tool and also on items listed as optional. And this is another nuance in the instructions. So there were some items that are optional for certain family types. But we just wanted to flag that if you have the data, for example, if it's optional for a certain family type, but you still know the race ethnicity of the individual, you may still want to enter that. Or if you know the number of hours that are countable towards the federal time limit for a non-recipient parent, you may still want to report that for your own purposes. Basically, if that individual becomes a recipient again, you would be able to look back at that data. So that's sort of a nuance. Again, we don't need that information, but if that's useful to you to be able to continue to report if the status of that individual changes, you can still report. So that is the first tab. And then the second tab is a table that shows the changes and implications of those changes. So from left to right, you'll see it'll tell you whether it's TANF or SSP, what section of the instructions or form you can find it under, the item number and the item name, the type of change. So here is where you could sort and only look at those that are substantive or code no longer in use. If you wanted to only, to filter out those that are non-substantive, since no changes will need to be made, you can do that. The notes kind of give a brief explanation of what was changed. And then that last column, FTANF implications, again, this is only relevant for those states and territories that use FTANF, but these are where we've flagged items that should continue to be reported as they were previously if you use FTANF. So you can kind of explore the crosswalk on your own, and I'll also pull it up to kind of show it live. But so one more thing about the FTANF implications column. So it's just going to flag if any of the errors, if FTANF is going to produce any errors, particularly if they're fatal errors, and it'll provide guidance on how to avoid those errors if that's applicable. So that really is the crosswalk. And then wanted to touch on the timing and expectations for implementation. I know you all have been very patient as we've been doing our due diligence to make sure the instructions are thoroughly considering all of these different scenarios. And we also know that we are in the middle of fiscal year 2024. So our sort of balance here is that we also are in this transition period from the TANF data reporting system to the TANF data portal. And so what we're kind of saying is that there's this golden time of the earliest you'd really want to be making these changes would be fiscal year 2024 Q3 of the data, which would be due August 14th. If you do them earlier, it's not the end of the world, but just to give time for the full transition to the TANF data portal, that's kind of the earliest that you would want those changes to be implemented. And then obviously we know these things take time to implement. They need to be fit into a longer queue of technical adjustment. So For 2025, we're considering that kind of a rolling implementation year where we're really expecting to see you aligning to these new instructions, but we're still going to be expecting to see some of these uh, data files following the old instructions. And uh, it's possible to do this again because the changes really were not for the most part not substantive and can be sort of what am I trying to say? Can be we can make the bridge across the two versions, but there is some flexibility as we know it takes time to fully implement. Um, Two other things about that. Like I mentioned, the TANF data portals, error reports do reflect the revised instructions. So you're going to start to see those errors coming back, reflecting the new instructions, but it's not going to be rejecting the cases or the files based on that. And then also we will be communicating with the TANF data contacts when the old system is fully decommissioned. And that's kind of the green light to fully embrace the new instructions. And so that was a lot. I do see that there are some comments in the chat already. And yeah, we were planning to open it up now to general Q&A. And then we have an additional slide about for FTANF users. So we can move to that after some more general Q&A. But I will stop there. Okay, let me very quickly look through the chat. Thank you, Caroline, for sharing the crosswalk. This is the final crosswalk. Yes, you can start planning system changes based on this. Earliest to make changes third quarters of FY24 for August 2024. Correct. Okay, if a state needs to retransmit Q1 or Q2 after the changes have been implemented, will it be okay to use the new changes, or do we have to use what we are currently using? No, it'll be completely fine to use the new changes. And again, the reason for the Q3 timeline is because TANF data portal has flexibilities that the TANF data reporting system does not. So the reason why we're sort of asking you to wait is because you would get tripped up in some of the same issues that the FTANF users will. So for example, if there's if we say you no longer need to report this to us, but for the TDRS and FTANF thinks that you do still need to report that, we just don't want any data to get trapped in that legacy system. So that's why we're saying Q3. Oh, yes, I did. Yes, the changes are final. There are some reports already available in TDP. And Alex, could you maybe speak to the status of those reports and what folks can expect to see in the coming weeks and months there?
Sure. So the quick answer is yes, those reports are available in TDP, but please note, as Lauren mentioned, we are still making refinements to the validation rules and particularly the language in those reports. And so you may see some references to those error reports still being in development. But for the most part, those checks are accounted for in those reports, but the language may be cleaned up in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, Alex. A very important question here, and I should have said this at the top. These these changes are not for tribal TANF, and I apologize for not saying that earlier because you could have spared yourself this webinar. But so the tribal TANF coding instructions is a separate document that has not been updated as part of this update with these instructions. So that's going to go through a separate process when that's updated. But these changes do not apply to tribal TANF. You can also keep using FTANF if you are a tribe, because nothing has changed there. Of course, TANF data portal does apply to tribal TANF. But yeah, this crosswalk, these changes do not. This is just for states and territories. Yeah, it was a great question about the resubmission. So I see the question, will fatal and warning edit lists be updated so we can incorporate them into our data reporting system? So fatal and warning edit lists are not going to be updated in the way they currently exist because they were not following that schema anymore, because fatal meant that individual record would not be included in the database. But that is not the case in the TANF data portal. So there's no such thing as fatal versus warning. There's only the error itself. So basically everything is a warning error, with the exception of errors that prevent the parsing of the data file itself. But Alex, I'll kick it to you if you want to clarify anything I just said, because that might have been.
No, I think that's exactly right. The only thing that I might add to that is the description of those edit codes as they appear in the existing documentation. Please note that TDP is also doing those exact same checks. So when you see an error like that come up in your feedback report, you can trust that it essentially means the same thing. It just may be more plain language than it is today.
Yeah, and so I think eventually we can, and maybe that's, if that's something that would be useful to you all, is to connect those dots between what you would see, basically updating those edit lists to reflect the plain language and the new errors, or the errors that are being flagged in TDP. So we can work on that. I see the question from Seth, but no. Will we continue to receive the statistical reports following a quarterly transmission, or will that be handled through the TDP in real time following the transmission? So I'm wondering, are these the WPR feedback reports? I'm assuming so. The short answer I would say is that eventually all of the reports will be migrated into TDP. Things like the reports showing you a preview of your work participation rate, that will not immediately be in TDP. That's still going to come through email in the short term, but we're moving to eventually incorporate that in TDP. The real-time feedback that you get is going to be based on the raw data you submit to us and the errors that may be catched. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, you had already answered it. You'll receive those same reports as before. Regardless of how they are named, will the text done on the data change? And if so, can we get new lists of them? For the most part, they are not changing, with the exception of the sort of substantive changes in that you can find in the crosswalk. But again, I'm hearing that there is interest in getting an update of the edit code list. Okay, again, for tribal TANF, we will be using this new portal for report submission, but the changes don't affect us at this time. Yeah, these are actually separate, separate but concurrently timed efforts. So the revisions to the ACF 199 and 209 are separate from the TANF data portal, but they are happening at the same time. So there will be a separate process revisiting the tribal TANF coding instructions. It's just on a different cycle. And we will have learned a lot from this process with the state and territory report to make sure that goes even more smoothly for tribes. But in the meantime, same instruction, same data you've format and everything you've been doing for tribal TANF, just now through the tribal, the TANF data portal. Will all staff need access to TDP to access data? Alex, can you speak to that one?
So everyone that is as an approved user in TDP will have access to previous data submissions for your particular jurisdictions and all historical feedback reports that are available in the system. You will have access to those as well.
Thank you. And I'm seeing the follow-up question, will program staff typically check WPR data quarterly? So like we said, the WPR quarterly, I believe it's monthly, but the WPR reports will continue to be over email. So that currently is not in TDP. So those in TDP are the ones who need to submit the data files, view the feedback, the errors, resubmit the data files, and then we'll be building out additional features like dashboards, analytics for those who work with the data. Yes, the WPR feedback process will stay the same for a while. We will be sharing a copy of the slides. Will there be a way for us to test our transmission files prior to sending actual data? That's a great question that we've talked about internally. Testing the transmission files before sending would be really helpful. Alex, I'm trying to remember where we landed on that. There are some, we have had this request from some states. There are some complications just in that, you know, obviously this is sensitive data, so it would sort of need to be a different environment. So it's something we're sort of still working out the best way to support that. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the easiest way to test your data is to submit it through the portal. Those feedback reports are immediately generated shortly after the submission. And as Lauren mentioned earlier, we are allowing a lot more time for jurisdictions to get up to speed on the changes, the coding changes. So we're definitely not opposed to resubmission. So you should feel free to use TDP to get the feedback and to get a sense of some of the things that may need to change in your files.
And you can also always communicate with us, let TANF data know, say, hey, we want to test this, and we'll know to be expecting resubmissions. But we do expect that a lot. Okay. Did I miss any comments? Oh, there's separate Q&A. Okay. Okay, here we go. Can we totally stop using the FTANF 2009 tool? Will it have any impact? I noticed that some of the data appears to have changed in FTANF, but never bothered to detail what the changes are. So it depends, and I think maybe we can discuss this more after when we kind of break out for just FTANF users. But it depends on what you're using it for. So, you know, I will say that eventually we hope to build the functionality that FTANF provides into the TANF data portal so that you truly can not use it anymore. But yeah, it depends what you're relying on it for currently. But we can definitely discuss that more. Any other general questions? Oh, I may have missed a question. Okay, if many errors and warnings are being recategorized as the same type, will that impact the number of types of errors that would be counted toward rejection threshold of 500? So the TANF data portal does not have a rejection threshold of 500. So wait, is that not true, Alex?
Oh no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are things that would prevent your file from records from being accepted into the database, and that is mostly related to the header record. But for the most part, unless there's something really wonky about the record, like it's way too long, I don't think you need to worry about the threshold for rejection in cases. They should all be in the database.
Yeah. And this is also helpful too. So as you know, I think the vast majority of everyone is already in TANF data portal, but you may not have been using it consistently yet. So as we, truly decommission the TANF data reporting system, as we finish key features in the TANF data portal, like questions like this are great because we need to, we're here to help bring you all along to the new system and highlight how things are different with the old system. And as you pointed out, so right now TDRS still rejects if there are 500 errors or more. So again, this is in the transition. Will we be able to get more staff access to TDP? We are only permitted 2 to 3 people, which are IT, to submit the file. Yes. You are not limited to just IT for the TANF data portal. And in fact, some of the features are going to be geared more towards, the non-IT, the folks who will understand the programmatic aspects of the TANF data. But yeah, I don't believe we have a limit, right, Alex?
That is correct.
Yeah, and especially as those dashboards, other features are built out. It might be more people at the director level would have an interest in seeing the data dashboards, things like that. I think happy to keep answering general questions. But I think, let's see, what time is it? Yeah, I think we'll move over to some more in-depth on FTNF. So folks are welcome to drop if that does not apply to you. If you're curious about what this is, I will say nobody should start using FTNF if you're not already. Again, it's not supported. We can't make fixes to it. So definitely don't start using it. And if you have any other additional questions, feel free to contact your OFA regional contacts. You can also send questions and feedback to us at tanfdata@acf.hhs.gov. Please do visit the TANF data portal, explore the Knowledge Center, take a look at the crosswalk and the instructions. we'll follow up about the edit codes update. And yeah, just we're here. Keep sending us your questions and concerns. And with that, I'll move to a bit more in depth about those of you who are FTANF users. Yeah, and I should say too, thank you all. For those who are dropping off, thank you for joining and thank you for your patience as we roll this out. And I'm realizing now too that I didn't open up the crosswalk, but I can do that, and or you can all do that and explore it yourself. So a little bit more about the FTANF implication. So one example of a change that matters to you all is there is a data item, received subsidized childcare. The new instructions say that that item is no longer in use and you should enter 0. And the reason why that is because number 18 is the amount of childcare received. And for that, if you put 0, then we know that individual did not receive, or that family did not receive subsidized childcare. So in an attempt to streamline the instructions, we've said you don't need to say yes or no to number 17. We already are inferring the answer from number 18. The problem is if you're using FTANF, either just to validate your files or to prepare your data files, and for number 17, if you put in 0, you're going to get a fatal error. And so that would be a big problem because it would be every record would be a fatal error. Again, TANF data portal doesn't consider fatal errors, but if you're using FTANF to export your data file and submit it to us, that's going to be a problem. So what we've done to indicate when this is an issue is we've marked in the instructions and the forms and layouts with an asterisk. And we've also noted it in the crosswalk when there are implications for FTANF. So Caroline, a member of our team, painstakingly went through, entered every change into FTANF and saw when there was a fatal error because some of it didn't even match the edit codes that were published. It's that old of a tool. And so in going through that, we've marked in the instructions, you're going to see an asterisk. In the forms and layouts, you're going to, like on the right hand side here, you're going to see an asterisk in the example of contents. And then I think maybe most usefully in the crosswalk, in the FTANF implications column, you're going to see notation when that's an issue. So use FTANF allowed values. And so what that means is, and we have the link here, but the legacy in range values can be found under the legacy edit codes here. So even though the instructions say item no longer use, enter 0, if you use FTANF, you can enter 1, you can enter 2, you can enter 3. We're still going to ignore it. We're still only going to pay attention to 18, the amount of childcare. But in order for those cases to make their way through the system, you're going to want to enter a value that's consistent with the legacy system. So I will say I apologize that this is the case. I know it is adds an extra layer of confusion, but we just want to make sure that these changes don't leave behind those of you who are using FTANF when we don't have a replacement to FTANF ready for you. Again, this does not apply to tribes, only states and territories that use FTANF. But I'll stop there. That's kind of the main point we wanted to get across with FTANF. Oop, these are just old slides. There's a question, is there a replacement in the future? Yes, we are very, future, definitely to be determined. We've got a lot of priority features we want to add to the TANF data portal, that, for various reasons take precedence, but, it is very much something that we would love to replace in TDP to have the ability to, submit your files, well, both for the validation aspect, so submit your files, for validation before submitting for processing, and then also in some cases for that, manual entry that we know folks use FTANF for. Although the solution is not an immediate priority, we would love to stay in touch, with those of you who use FTANF and to call on you, and involve you in future user research so that we can make sure as we're building the FTANF replacement, what is the priority for you? Is it the validating? Is it the manual entry? What aspect of FTANF do we need to replace first? So please stay tuned for that. And also, if you'd proactively like to be a part of that research and just kind of want to get on that list, feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, we know that there's a much better technology out there, that can do what FTANF does. Any other questions? I might, while we're here, I think I'll just pull up the crosswalk so you can see. I know it's probably pretty small, but you can see here, so you could filter to just look at those that have the FTANF implications. You're going to see things, in some cases, it's just a warning error. In some cases, you should use FTANF allowed values. Sometimes it's warning. Yeah, so it's either warning out. If it's a warning error, it's not going to tell you to use the FTANF allowed values, but if it does tell you that, then I believe in most cases those were then fatal errors. So if you have any questions as you're going through the crosswalk, certainly feel free to reach out to us. Yeah. Oh, please don't be using. I mean, use it, I would say, at your own risk, just because, again, we've had issues where it's not compatible with new operating systems, and we have no way to kind of to get around that. But we do hear you that, yeah, being able to test files is a huge need. And we really do want to develop that functionality. And in the meantime, like Alex was saying, you can use the TANF data portal to that effect, and then replace the files as errors are fixed. But yeah, that is something that we'll continue to work on. Okay. Really appreciate all of these questions, all of you for hanging with us, for the TANF data team for their diligent due diligence, their very thorough work in cataloging all of these changes and trying to communicate it as best we can to you all. So thank you to everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll send around the slides, and the recording will be on the PRTA website in a few weeks. And don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.